Welcome back to my channel. In 2002, the U.S. Mint continued its ceaseless duty, striking millions upon millions of Roosevelt dimes with unflinching accuracy. The machines were efficient, the engravings routine. Each coin bore the same dignified profile of Franklin D. Roosevelt on the obverse, and the familiar torch, olive branch, and oak branch on the reverse. It had been this way for decades, since 1946. In the eyes of the public, the dime had become a symbol of predictability, small, silver-toned, and forgettable. But deep within the sprawling operations of the Philadelphia Mint, as presses fired and planchets fed through conveyor systems with rhythmic consistency, something slipped. A minor variation, barely perceptible and fleeting, occurred amid the thousands of coins struck each minute. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough to escape unnoticed into circulation, nestled among perfectly ordinary dimes. The error lay dormant for years. It would take a trained eye to even suspect anything was wrong. That I belonged to a collector named Margot, a retiree from Pennsylvania who had taken up coin roll hunting as a hobby during quiet evenings. She didn't consider herself an expert, just someone with a deep love for the overlooked. One night, while sorting through a fresh batch of bank-wrapped dimes, she paused. A 2002p dime caught her attention. It looked different, not obviously wrong, just off. She turned it under the light. The rim seemed thinner than the rest. The strike looked unusually weak around the edges, and the date wasn't sharply defined. Curious, she compared it to others in the same roll. The difference became clearer. This one had a muted surface, almost dull, with a texture inconsistent with standard copper-nickel-clad coins. Margot weighed the coin on a digital scale. It came in at 2.09 grams, significantly lighter than the standard 2.27 grams. Her heart fluttered. She tested it again. Same result. This dime was underweight. Either post-mint damage, or something far more interesting. She carefully slipped the coin into a holder and brought it to a local dealer the next morning. The dealer squinted, frowned, then pulled out a magnifying lens. "Struck on a foreign planchet?" he suggested. "Maybe a leftover blank from a mint contract?" He turned the coin slowly, checking the edges. "Or a test piece that slipped into production?" The possibilities were speculative, but one thing was certain: it wasn't ordinary. Word spread among error coin enthusiasts. Some had heard rumors of similar 2002 dimes surfacing. A few mentioned coins struck on planchets meant for 10 centavos coins, likely leftover blanks from a foreign order. One individual shared photos of a 2002 dime struck on a brass planchet, golden in color, clearly smaller and thinner than usual. That one had been graded and authenticated. It sold at a private sale for nearly $1,000. But Margot's coin had something different. It wasn't brass. It still resembled a dime, just incomplete. Under scrutiny, experts concluded it was struck on a miscut planchet, possibly clipped from the edge of a sheet, resulting in a thinner and underweight coin. The planchet had likely passed undetected through the quality control systems. Only a handful of similar examples existed for that year. As error coins gained more visibility across online marketplaces and collector expos, the 2002p dime error gradually built a reputation. More collectors began investigating the year, scouring rolls and pocket change, hoping to uncover a mistake that had slipped past the mint's sharpest checks. The prices began modestly. A low-grade off-metal 2002 dime sold for $75 in 2010. By 2014, another with a partial color error and weak strike fetched $215. But the real jump came in 2017, when a specimen struck on a planchet intended for a foreign coin, likely a South American 10 centavos blank, went to public auction. Certified by PCGS as a genuine mint error, it garnered attention from seasoned numismatists. That coin sold for $2,300. The momentum didn't stop there. Collectors began documenting known specimens, creating informal registries and photo archives to compare characteristics. The mint remained mostly silent, never formally acknowledging a production anomaly in 2002, but the evidence was clear. Some errors had escaped. How many? No one knew. Then, in 2023, a collector at a Michigan coin show unveiled a 2002p dime with a striking anomaly. The obverse was flawless, but the reverse showed dramatic die rotation, nearly 165 degrees. The coin had been preserved in pristine condition, a sharp strike with full detail, yet so misaligned it looked like two different coins glued together. Experts gathered, theories swirled. It was verified, encapsulated, and presented at auction with high anticipation. Bidding was fierce. The final hammer stunned the room. The dime sold for $4,500. Margot's original find. It remained in her collection, now graded and officially labeled 2002p Roosevelt dime, struck on a thin misaligned planchet. Only a few like it had ever surfaced. It had never gone to auction. She said she didn't need the money, but estimates placed its value around $3,000 based on current market interest. Today, collectors regard the 2002 Roosevelt dime with cautious fascination. It isn't a year one would expect to yield a high-value coin. There were no major design changes, no minting overhauls. But beneath the surface of mass production, something slipped. A planchet, a misalignment, a rotation, tiny imperfections born of an industrial process, and just enough rarity to create waves. So, if you happen upon a 2002 dime in your change, pause for a moment. Check its weight. Study its rim. Look for anomalies. Because hidden within the ordinary might be a mistake the mint didn't mean to make, one that could be worth more than $4,500. In 1978, the hum of the U.S. Mint's coin presses echoed through the Philadelphia and Denver facilities as yet another year's worth of Roosevelt dimes rolled off the production lines. With millions being struck by the day, there was little room for individual uniqueness. Each coin followed the same time-worn design established in 1946. Franklin D. Roosevelt's profile remained fixed on the obverse, a silent tribute to a leader whose image had become synonymous with America's smallest circulating coin. It was a year without commemoration, without change, just another rotation in the machine of monetary consistency. But amidst the smooth functioning process, a subtle mishap occurred. It wasn't loud, nor did it spark an immediate outcry. No alarms were triggered. No urgent memos were dispatched. Instead, it was a quiet mistake, masked by the overwhelming tide of near-identical dimes. Years passed. Somewhere in New Jersey, decades after the coin's mintage, a seasoned collector named Neil sat at his desk sorting through an inherited jar of coins. It wasn't particularly impressive, just the kind of dusty glass container passed down from a relative who'd always insisted on saving good change. For Neil, these jars were time capsules, often more nostalgic than valuable. Still, he examined each piece with a magnifying lens and a sense of purpose. Then he noticed a 1978 Roosevelt dime, dull in tone, but peculiar in shape, sat oddly among its companions. Neil tilted it slightly. The coin looked off-center. Not severely, but enough to unsettle its symmetry. The date curved awkwardly toward the rim, and the rim itself was barely present on one side, bulging unnaturally on the opposite. He had seen off-center strikes before, but rarely this subtle, and rarely from this year. He weighed it, 2.27 grams standard. The metal composition checked out, but the strike was just wrong enough to raise questions. Curious, he checked the reverse and found another anomaly. The torch's base was missing part of its flame due to a weak strike. Neil's pulse picked up. This wasn't a worn coin. It had all the signs of a striking error. The kind that occurred when a planchet wasn't correctly seated in the collar, resulting in a misaligned strike. Neil packaged it carefully and submitted it to a professional grading service. Weeks later, the report arrived. 1978 Roosevelt dime, off-center strike, 10%, obverse weak, 58 Australian dollars. It wasn't a dramatic misstrike, but for this year in mint, It was remarkably uncommon. He began researching further. Error dimes from the 1970s did exist, but most were from earlier years. The U.S. Mint had tightened quality control through the late 70s, meaning significant errors from this time were less frequent and more desirable to collectors, especially those in near mint condition. It didn't take long for Neil's dime to attract attention online. One collector claimed to have seen a similar error in a 1978 dime with partial brockage on the reverse, sold years earlier at a small regional auction for about $400. Another reported a 1978 dime struck on a set planchet, resulting in a reddish tone and clipped features. That one had fetched nearly $1,200 due to its rarity. Neil's coin, with its off-center strike and weak obverse detail, wasn't quite as dramatic, but its grade and preservation made it stand out. As he explored auction records, he discovered only a handful of 1978 dimes with recognized mint errors had ever reached the open market. Most sold quietly, passed between collectors who specialized in subtle minting anomalies. Then came a twist. At a coin show in Ohio, Neil met a dealer who had spent years cataloging off-center Roosevelt dimes. The dealer, intrigued by the coin, asked to compare it with several others he had brought. What they discovered was unexpected. Neil's dime appeared to come from a series of strikes where the misalignment progressively worsened. The dealer had one struck slightly more center than Neil's, and another that showed a 15% off-center strike from the same die pair. It became clear. Neil's dime wasn't just a random mistake, it was part of a progression. The discovery turned a mild error into something more interesting, a traceable sequence of flawed strikes that told a story of mechanical drift and oversight. With proper documentation, the group could form a mini collection, each piece illustrating a moment in the progression. Soon, a private buyer made Neil an offer, not just for his coin, but for the right to build a registry set around that 1978 misalignment series. After a few rounds of negotiation, the deal closed. The final price? $850. For a dime that once sat forgotten in a jar. Even now, most 1978 dimes pass through hands unnoticed. They vanish into vending machines, fall between car seats, or gather dust in drawers. But a few, very few, carry within them a quiet mistake, a shift, a deviation. And for the collector who finds it, that small error can become something unforgettable. Because in the world of coins, it's not always the boldest strikes that hold the highest value. Sometimes, it's the ones that nearly got it right. In 1981, the Roosevelt dime remained a staple of daily commerce, slipping silently from pocket to palm, vending machine to cash drawer, ferrying groceries and morning coffees with unassuming regularity. Its design was familiar: Franklin D. Roosevelt on the obverse, a torch flanked by olive and oak branches on the reverse, unchanged for decades. At the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints, the presses continued their tireless rhythm, striking millions of dimes that would seem indistinguishable to the untrained eye. But even in the most automated systems, errors sometimes sneak through. Errors not born of chaos, but of mechanical fatigue, split-second misalignments, or overlooked calibrations. In 1981, one such anomaly occurred, unnoticed amid the mass production of tens of millions of coins. No one at the time suspected that a minor minting deviation could eventually shift the perception of a single dime's worth. It wasn't discovered right away. In fact, it wasn't until decades later that it surfaced. In a small town in northern Minnesota, a young numismatist named Claire was methodically combing through an old coin collection left behind by her grandfather. Most of it was predictable: common wheat pennies, standard nickels, circulated quarters, the usual assortment of pocket change collected over a lifetime. She was about to return the final tray to its box when a silver-toned dime caught the light just wrong. She paused. Something was strange. The coin, dated 1981, looked ordinary at first glance. But when she placed it beside another 1981 Roosevelt dime, the difference became obvious. The Liberty, Inscription was weaker, almost vanishing near the edge. The date, too, seemed unnaturally close to the rim. Turning the coin over, she noticed an unusual flattening of the torch base and parts of the olive branch. The edge lacked its usual defined reading. Part of it seemed almost smooth, as if the collar hadn't fully engaged. She retrieved her loop and leaned in. There was no postment damage. No signs of filing or alteration. The features were softly struck, consistent with a misaligned die or improper striking pressure. The weight was precise, 2.27 grams. Metal content checked out, a copper core clad in a nickel outer layer. Claire cross-referenced it with error guides and numismatic forums. The signs pointed to a misaligned die strike, an error where the dies used to impress the coin fall slightly out of alignment, resulting in a skewed image. It wasn't the kind of error that immediately dazzled. There were no dramatic off-center gaps or double images. But it was rare for 1981, a year when quality control at the mints was relatively stable. She posted images on a collector's forum. Reactions poured in, some dismissive, others intrigued. One veteran error collector responded with interest, noting that he had seen similar errors in dimes from 1981, but only 2 others had ever been submitted for grading. Both carried similar characteristics: weak peripheral devices, slightly tilted alignment, and subtle rim distortion. It wasn't dramatic, but it was scarce. Claire sent her coin for professional grading. Weeks passed. Then came the results. 1981 Roosevelt dime, misaligned die strike, partial collar strike, 55 Australian dollars. It confirmed her suspicion and gave the error official recognition. The market for error coins is a peculiar one. It thrives not just on rarity, but on narrative, how and why a coin came to be different. Collectors who pursue these coins don't just buy metal, they buy a story locked in time. A minting mishap preserved for decades. The 1981 dime was becoming one of those stories. Claire watched its value evolve slowly. At first, modest offers came in, $50 here, $100 there. Then a collector specializing in Roosevelt dime anomalies contacted her directly. He had compiled a near-complete run of dime errors from 1965 onward and had been seeking a confirmed 1981 misaligned die example for nearly 5 years. He offered her double the highest public offer. She hesitated. A week later, a third-party dealer contacted her on behalf of a buyer looking to assemble a graded series of Roosevelt dimes showcasing rare strike deviations by year. He offered more, significantly more, and wanted to pair it with another partial collar strike from the late 70s. Claire negotiated carefully, seeking advice from trusted coin experts, and made the sale. The final price? $100. For a coin once buried in an attic box, mistaken for ordinary. The 1981 Roosevelt dime continues to appear in circulation, virtually indistinguishable from millions of others. Yet for a few coins born in that year, the pressure shifted ever so slightly, the alignment deviated just enough, and the rim fell short of its form. And for collectors who recognize the signs, those subtle differences transform a 10-cent piece into a priceless fragment of minting history.